Welcome everyone to the Executive Committee meeting of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board on Friday, February 26th. And for the record, this meeting is being held in accordance with the State of California Executive Order N-29-20. And members of the public may observe this meeting electronically by accessing the meeting via the instructions in the announcement. And the public may provide comments at any matter listed on the agenda. Speakers are customarily limited to 3 minutes each. However, I have flexibility. And if you are an individual with a disability and need reasonable modifications or accommodations, please contact the board clerk, Andrea Pisano. And with that, we will do a call to order and a roll call, please.
Yes, thank you. Chair Gibbons.
Here.
Vice Chair Tyson.
Here.
Flagger.
Here.
Elahi.
Here.
Abekoga.
Here.
Thank you. All are present and we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. This is the point at the meeting where members of the public may feel free to comment on any item not on the agenda. Do we have anyone wishing to speak on items not on the agenda?
I see a hand raised for John Willie.
Andrea, can you connect with that one, please?
Yes, I will. Okay. John? If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes. So I'm joining as a guest because I'm not seeing a link, but I'm the primary for Cupertino. So wouldn't I be a part of this group?
So correct me, John, I believe you are not a member of the executive committee.
Ah, okay.
And I'm going to ask our clerk, Andrea, to confirm with me that I'm correct.
Yes, you are correct. Director Willie, you are not a member of the executive committee.
Okay,
So
great.
you are most welcome to join us and listen. Actually, Kenny, do we have too many? What do we have a quorum? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us. So you could listen in and participate if you wished, but you are also relinquished from any responsibility to stay along.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, John, for checking in. Okay. With that, we have a consent calendar, which is an action item. It is one item approving the minutes of the February 4th, 2021 Executive Committee meeting. Any comments, questions, or motions?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Tyson, second. Oh.
Okay, so I heard a motion from Director Elahi and a second by Director Flagor. And are there any questions? I should open it to the public at this point, I suppose. I should have probably done that in the reverse order. I will ask if there are any questions on the motion, and then we will go to public comment. No questions from directors? Seeing none, we will go to public comment. Are there any comments on the consent calendar item? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing and bring it back for any final discussion or a vote. Seeing no final discussion, we will move to a vote. May we have a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. Chair Gibbons.
Here, yes.
Vice Chair Tyson.
Yes.
Flagger.
Yes.
Elahi.
Yes.
Abekoga.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries unanimously.
I'm being challenged by by Director Tyson to run fast meetings. So the regular calendar.
No. That was the regular meetings. This one you can keep going.
So we have a regular calendar items 1 and 2. We'll begin with item number 1, which is the CEO update, and it is a discussion item.
Thank you, Chair Gibbons and members of the Executive Committee. I am going to spend some time on my CEO report, maybe longer than usual. And Andrea is going to pop up some slides. I'm going to go through about 3 or 4 introductory slides, which are more big picture framing, and then spend about at least 10-15 minutes on one slide. And hopefully we can have some discussion on that. So please go to the next slide. So big picture, what do we do as SVCE, right? It's that green arrow that's pointing downward in the chart on the right, which is how do we get emissions down in our service area? And each of the bars show electricity being the lowest, then you have natural gas or buildings, and then transportation. And we do this looking at 3 large vectors: power supply, buildings, and mobility. So that's what our entire strategic plan is based on, right? So let's go to the next slide. And we do have a strategic plan. We have 19 goals, accompanying measures, and next slide. And we have a process by which we engage the board and staff. We have a continuing dialogue right through the year. And this is a chart that kind of shows this, where there are different places where they're like formal, what I call interventions, so to speak, where the board has a chance to set goals for the CEO, myself, the mid-year budget, the actual budget, the strategic plan update. So there's an ongoing process, and it's something that the board has encouraged me to do. And this is something that's also part of my style, which makes sure that the board is updated and we get constant kind of dialogue and engagement. So we are in the middle of this process, so to speak, where we're in the middle of the year. The next item is going to be the mid-year budget. But I did want to frame a variety of strategic issues, some of which have changed from the time that we adopted our strategic plan, and also our strategic focus areas. You know, a strategic plan has 19 goals and 61 measures. And even though we cut our strategic plan in half in terms of length, 19 goals is still too many for a board, right, for us to really focus on. So one thing we did as a board staff, we did together last year, is we talked about 5 strategic focus areas that we could kind of get our hands around. And that's the next slide. Again, this is mostly for kind of like a partly reminder and partly just, you can go to the next slide, Andrea. So these are the 5 areas that we identified. Additional resources and efficiencies. The point on that was, as we move to a greater level of sophistication, right? We have a lot more PPAs that we've signed, for example. We have now 8 PPAs worth $1 billion that you've signed. And we have another 3 that are coming in. Managing that, the risk management around our systems, it does require more staff and more enterprise-wide systems, metrics, and tools. So those are the first 2. A focus on equity. As we move to a clean energy system, making sure that that clean energy transition, we focus and we keep our lens clear in terms of equity issues so that we don't have disadvantaged communities not take advantage of all the changes that are happening. The 4th one was a digital pivot. In order to reach our customers, we have 270,000 customers. There's only that many art and wine fairs we can show up at and put our boots on and reach out to people to really get people to buy into and get them aware, inspired, and actually take action on carbon-free appliances, etc. Whether it's EVs or it's a electric range. We've created the eHub. We've started the process of doing email marketing. And this is also connected to things like enterprise-wide systems, metrics, and tools, where we need to have the data analytics that we can really target our digital outreach. And the last is community outreach and leverage, which is the power of our local elected officials, right? We have 71 elected officials in our 13 agencies over here. And how do we educate them as we move forward? Because things like the building decarbonization plan or our EV infrastructure plan, or things that we are looking at on the electric side too, on storage, et cetera, behind the meter storage and resilience, it's going to require a lot of education of our local electeds right up to folks in Sacramento. So Melissa, you approved a senior government relations manager back in November, and we are in the process of hiring someone. The applications just closed last Friday. We have some very good applications, and we're in the process of shortlisting, and hopefully by the beginning of April, we should have that one staff member here. So all this is set up. Reminder, you all know about this, but now let me move to where the next slide that I want to spend most of my time on. So the slide's kind of divided into two parts. On the left-hand side is what I'm calling just SVCE priorities and issues, but they're also connected to what's happening outside on the external. So I'll kind of go back and forth, and I've kind of, one's purple on the right, left-hand side's blue, kind of go back and forth between them, and just spend time here and open for questions at any time from the board. And these are issues that will be coming to the board in some way or the other, some of them for action, but just the context. These are things you would want to know about at some level, in some cases in more detail, sometimes just for awareness, to know what we're bringing to you and be able to give us direction in the months to come. So on the left-hand side, board orientation, we have basically of the 26 new board members, we have 13 who are brand new. So there's a lot of orientation that is required. And we've done our first meeting, and then the second and third meetings have just been scheduled. So we'll continue with that. COVID-19 customer debt. That has become an issue, not just for us, but it's actually a statewide issue. Just a few days ago, the CPUC had a workshop around this. For example, PG&E has almost $1 billion of customer-related debt. If you remember when COVID started, all disconnections were stopped. So those customers who couldn't pay their bills, there was basically, those were tracked, but the customers were not disconnected. So all those payments continue to be accrued, and it's been extended through June of 2021 now. And the PUC has just started a proceeding to figure out, what do we do with this? How do we fund it? How do we make sure that the utilities continue to be whole in terms of what they basically fronted in terms of the power that they purchased? And we have similar issues. So I'm just teeing this issue up, and Amrit will actually touch on it briefly, because we're going to set aside some money to deal with this. We don't know exactly how we're going to deal with it, and we'll bring it to you in the coming months. But I wanted to tee up that is an issue for us also. SVCE staffing. We have, as of today, 32 employees that have been approved. We have 8 vacancies, and it's due to multiple reasons. One is we've had some difficulty in hiring some new employees. We are redoing some of our job classifications, and you'll see that in Amrit's presentation, and we'll bring you some further ones in April. And we've had some folks who have left us. So it's a combination of all these 3 reasons, where we have some staffing issues which are temporary. I expect within the next 3 to 6 months, we would have filled all these positions again. But the reason I'm bringing it up to you is just from a bandwidth perspective of everything that's on our plate. That definitely is a constraint for us at this point in time. And you see it with some things being delayed, like our contractor online training. It's delayed through May. It's just one of those things where there's just that much we can do. So I wanted to bring it to your attention. Item 4, CC Power, which is California Community Power. This is the super JPA that was formed with 9 different CCAs. Last week, we had our first board meeting. I pulled the short straw. I'm the chair of this JPA. At this first meeting, Javed, we will have a written report for the March board meeting. The report has been prepared already and has been distributed. Yes, and has been distributed to all the CC Power members. But I did want to bring up an issue that was brought up to us at that meeting. And that is, we had several entities, mostly labor, but one group of environmental entities that approached CC Power and said, hey, you should be adopting policies around a sustainable workforce, around prevailing wage, around project labor agreements, about not buying unbundled recs, around environmental and equity policies. And they would like CC Power to adopt those policies. So several of these groups have also approached individual CCAs, and Margaret, our chair, has just received a letter yesterday that we will circulate to the entire board, which is essentially the same set of issues. So we have set up an ad hoc committee of the CC Power board with 4 of the CEOs and the interim general manager to look at all that and come back to the CC Power board with a set of policies. So we'll be working on that over the next 2 months. And here at SVCE, I'll also bring that up so that we can have some parallel policies adopted by the SVCE board. We may need some discussion on it, but I'd say just high level when I look at it, there's probably about 3/4 of it that we should just adopt without, I think, too much discussion. It's not going to be too much, but we should go through that process of bringing the whole board along. Items 5 and 6, we will continue to come to you with new PPAs. Next month and April 2, we continue to negotiate our 2020 RFO. And so you'll be seeing more of that. I'll talk about 6 in connection to some of these external things that are happening. I'll come back to that. Number 7 is actually connected to one of our strategic focus areas, which is the enterprise-wide systems, metrics, and tools. We've kind of, our internal name for it is called Business Process Optimization. It's been named by Amrit, who's done this before. He has expertise in this. And he and Amy are essentially leading this process enterprise-wide within SVCE. So that is something, as I told you, with the strategic plan level time, this is about a 2-year journey for us, and it's going to take a lot of resources, some temporary and some longer term. And Amrit will tease some of those shorter term resources that he'll be asking for approval, but we'll also be bringing in some long-term resources. Any of you who have worked with bringing in enterprise-wide systems into your organizations know that it is a long transition, and there will be short-term things, actions we can take, but overall it's a big change management. This is technology change management that we're looking at. And you'll see how important that is, especially when you start to look at things like what happened in Texas and things like that. So this is really important. Item 8 is SB 612 legislation in the PCIA. Over the last couple of months, we've talked to you about the PCIA, the uncertainty of the PCIA, the black box nature of the PCIA, and how the PCIA continues to increase over the years. SB 612 is legislation that's been introduced by Senator Portantino from Southern California. And he has 15 co-authors, including our senator here, Senator Becker, is one of the co-authors. And SB 612 essentially puts into legislative language a compromise on the PCIA and allocation of resources we are paying for, that Southern California Edison and Cal CCA came together with that compromise. That compromise agreement has been sitting at the PUC for more than 10 months and no action has been taken. So the legislation, hopefully we can get through legislation what we are not getting through regulation. And so that has the potential to lower our costs by about $3 million a year. That's a question that Javed had. So there's many complexities to it, but I'll say that at least in the next 3 to 5 years, it'll be about $3 million per year. The last is financial levers, and we'll talk about that more when Amrit brings up his presentation, which is, we have two constraints that we've put on ourselves as an agency. First is we said we'll be 100% carbon free, and the second, we're going to offer energy at a discount. So those are the two kind of guiding kind of principles or policies. Well, as the PCIA goes up, or PG&E's generation rate comes down, we have to adapt to that. So if we don't change the discount and we continue to be 100% carbon free, something has to give. And what it gives is on the financial side, we may have to dip into reserves. So the financial levers is basically what levers do we have to relax some of these constraints? Are there other places where we can reduce our costs or increase our revenues? So we have a few ideas that we just tee up. Again, this is not something that you have to decide today or even in 3 months, but it's something that you should all know about, get input. We would want to get your input and understand what the different dimensions of freedom you have, or we have, to make sure that we continue to invest in clean, reliable energy and offer it up in an affordable manner. I'm going to go now to the right side, and as I'm going through this and explaining what is on the left, I'm looking to see if there are any questions, and feel free to ask questions at any time, or I'll stop after I finish items A through F. So just over this last week, items A and B have to do with reports that were released on a statewide basis. The state auditor released a report on how California, and especially the California Air Resources Board, is meeting its long-term emissions target of getting emissions down to 337 million tons by the year 2030. And it was quite a critical report, essentially saying that we are not on track as a state, and CARB has to do many more things in terms of measurement to make sure that the cap and trade, the number of recommendations that they have. So that'll be something that CARB will be looking at. And from our perspective, transportation and buildings are the biggest piece of emissions left in our service territory. This week, there were two major reports, one by the UC Berkeley Haas School and the Energy Institute. And the second one was from the CPUC's Public Advocate's Office. Both looked at the state of electric rates in our state today and where it's going in year 2030. And both these groups had very different lenses on the same issue. They both ended up being quite, very challenging. The electric rate forecast for PG&E shows that rates are going to continue to increase at a rate of 3.7% per year for the next 10 years. And most of those cost increases are coming from building out transmission and wildfire costs, so wildfire mitigation costs. So from the statewide perspective, they just teed up hey, we need to figure out a way to deal with this because we want to get to an electrified grid. We want to get to an economy that's electrified. And if rates are going up, it's going to be difficult. And specifically, when rates go up, it has a disproportionate hit towards those who are disadvantaged, just the way our rates are set up, which was the second report from the UC Berkeley Haas School. They were talking about how our system is set up today, where PG&E's cost of power is about 3 times the marginal cost of power today. So your next kilowatt hour, you can buy it at 1/3 of PG&E's rate. And the way rates are actually created today, most of PG&E and IOU costs are what's known as fixed costs. But the way in which revenue is collected is through a variable charge. So the Berkeley professors had some ideas on what one could do on that. And they also brought up some really big policy issues like climate change and wildfire mitigation. You know, it was like, those are social benefits, right? When you stop wildfires, it's not just utility customers that are benefiting, everyone in California benefits. Similarly with climate change efforts that are being done. So the point of that being, the people who are thinking about this, they are recognizing that there is a problem. And so this is the same thing that we have to, right? So emission reduction and electrification are things that we are looking at. So I want to bring that up, that this is being discussed there. So moving on to item C, the Texas blackout. Essentially, on a physical basis, it was a supply-demand imbalance of ginormous proportions, right? Something like 25, 30,000 megawatts of disparity. Load went up to historic highs, something like 68,000 megawatts. Just so you know, the California ISO's historic peak has been 52,000 megawatts. So this is very high. As the weeks progress, we will get more and more information about the reasons. I'll talk to you about a few things. So in California, we think, how is this going to impact California? One thing is Texas has a different market. It's what's known as an energy-only market with prices that can go up to $9,000 a megawatt hour. There is going to be very, very serious financial consequences that we're going to be hearing about in the next few weeks and months. The city of Denton, for example, has a utility. In 4 days, they spent more money on electricity than they spent in an entire year, the previous year. So there are going to be retailers who are going to go out of business because they may have been selling at a fixed price, but they don't have hedges on the other side. The legislature, the governor, Governor Abbott, unfortunately, basically was not telling the truth when he started off with his initial comments about the reasons for the blackout. The blackout was due to supply-demand imbalance. Wind and solar did play a part, but natural gas and nuclear are a bigger part of Texas's portfolio. So it really was an all of the above failure. And it's a lesson that we need to take in also. And this is what I'm sure that folks at the PUC and the state legislature are thinking about. Is this going to happen in California? So there are, when I think about this, and this is something that we'll know more about, you know, in the weeks and months to come, I think about different things like direct access. CPUC is going to deliver to our state legislature the direct access report that was part of SB 237 from 2019. SB 237, that direct access law, not only increase the amount of direct access in the state from about 13% to 15%, but it also asked the PUC to come up with a study which said, what if we open up all CNI load to direct access? What is it going to take? And so that report is going to go to the legislature in March. Texas has a completely deregulated market, or I should say most of its market is deregulated. They have more than 200 energy service providers that provide direct access to customers. So I'm sure the CPUC and the governor's office will be looking at these two business models, and we will have an opportunity to talk to our state legislators too about what we think is the way to go. Another reaction I think that'll happen in California is what we've been seeing in the last year, which is a push at the CPUC to centralize things, right? So I think the CPUC, after seeing what's happened in Texas and what happened in California last year, there may be more of a push to let's centralize buying resources for reliability, which gets to my point, the blue number 6, reliability resource purchases. Already the PUC has centralized local resource adequacy purchases is all going to be done by PG&E in Southern California Edison. Starting 2023, we don't have any more responsibility for that. All that responsibility gets taken away by PG&E. They will buy local capacity and just charge us for it. With Diablo Canyon going to be out of our portfolio by the end of 2025, and that'll be a 2,000 megawatt baseload hole. And the blackouts of last year, just earlier this week, the CPUC issued an initial order directing all load-serving entities to purchase up to 7,000 megawatts of capacity and energy through the year 2024. So we're going to, with CalCCA, interact with the CPUC on that. But they did also have a comment in the order about they should also think about centralizing maybe for this. The third reaction to the Texas blackout has to do with data access. I also think what happened there was a failure in terms of analytics and forecasting this kind of extreme load. In California too, we've spent more than $15 billion on smart meters, and we have not really harvested the value of that investment. And all of us are doing our own forecast. The California Energy Commission does the forecast for the entire state, but I think that would be another thing we need to look at, which is the granularity of the forecast and get the forecast to adapt to the climate changes that we have. We're going to continue to have extreme events, and as we, whether it's SVC or the state, continue to electrify everything, how is that going to show up in extreme weather events, right? We don't know. We've never had a system with, Texas has never had a system with this much electrification too. So going into item D, I started to talk about that, the summer reliability. The IOUs are already purchasing for summer. There's also item E, it's long-term electric reliability in California. The PUC is looking at different models on how we can procure for reliability. So there's a model that CalCCA and Southern California Edison have proposed. PG&E has proposed another model, and the CPUC has proposed another model. Just in the last month, there have been multiple day workshops around it. And so that continues to be discussed, and hopefully by the end of the year, or middle of the year, I think, we'll be having some direction on that. So all this also gets to things on the left-hand side, right? And to what we'll have to purchase, how are we managing our finances and our energy risk management system. The last item is the legislature. And today is the last day in this session of the California legislature for bill introduction. As of this morning, our lobbyists tell us that we have almost 160 energy-related bills that have been introduced. So Mel is going to be very busy, continues to be very busy, and she's working with the Cal CCA Legislative Committee to prioritize what it is that we're going to be working on. So there's a lot going on. Don't expect, there's no decisions to be made per se, but I just wanted to bring it up, especially with the exec committee. We have a lot more opportunity for dialogue to give you some background and kind of frame things that are going to be coming to you, not just today, but over the next several months. So with that, I'm going to take a breath, take a sip of water, be prepared for your questions.
Thank you very much, Girish. That was most informative. So what we'll do is we'll go to questions from the executive board members, then to public comment, and then back to discussion. So do we have any questions right now? Director Tyson?
Yeah, so I have one question and then a few comments. So I'll hold off on the comments. Okay, I think that is your format. And so my question, I heard about the PG&E 3.7% a year increase, and that was ascribed to things like wildfire, addressing wildfire risks as part of that, which frankly strikes me as kind of a parallel. Like that's our extreme weather, the high winds, the parallel to Texas's low temperatures, perhaps, in terms of the risk to our grid. So I'm wondering, if we peg our rates to PG&E's rates, and PG&E's rates are going up due to this wildfire thing, is that a good thing for us, or does that increase some costs, maybe like the PCIA, that come to us and it doesn't give us a benefit to have PG&E's rates going up so that we have a little more breathing room between us?
A great question. The 3.7 is PG&E's overall rates. And so, they allocate that 3.7% increase between generation, transmission, and distribution, and public purpose programs. So we haven't broken it down to each of those segments, and that's part of what we will be doing in the weeks and months to follow. But overall, yeah, so just say it's applied equally. Just say it's applied equally around all those, right? So yes, 3.7% applied to generation rates year after year does give us more headroom, breathing room, yes. However, that's us as a agency, right? Obviously, it gives us breathing room to build our reserves, use that to reinvest into the community, et cetera. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. That makes a lot of sense. I said I only had one question, but it turns out I have a second one. Diablo Canyon. Are they really going to shut it down? Is this, I mean, look at the firestorm of criticism of green energy during a period of extreme weather. I'm just picturing there should be forces, I would think, to extend that, to say, well, let's go another 2 years or 3 years, or we need to learn better how to do that. Have you got any insight onto that?
You are in a minority, George. And I join you in that. I really think it is, from a political standpoint, nuclear is just, it's off the table. Okay. But I think your point of, energy policy, we're supposed to be looking around the corner, right? What's going to happen? And that's the issue. The PUC, the CAISO, we are looking at it. Unfortunately, there is not a clear path. So things like long duration energy storage are technologies that are being proposed. And so part of this replacement of Diablo Canyon of 7,500 megawatts. It's not just replacement of Diablo Canyon. They've increased the reserve margins that all of us have to comply with, and that's got to that 7,500 megawatts. And we have natural gas plants that are going to continue to be retired. These are natural gas plants with once-through cooling down the coast. And so we need to put those 7,500 megawatts. And off that 7,500 megawatts, they have carved out 2,000 of those megawatts for 1,000 of those megawatts be long duration storage and another 1,000 for geothermal energy. So that's how they're coming out with, things to replace Diablo, right? So the base load, geothermal would be clean base load of 1,000 megawatts. Diablo's about 2,200, so about half of that. Long duration energy storage defined as 8 hours or more, another 1,000 megawatts. So yeah, they're filling that Diablo gap with something that's kind of equivalent.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Director Flygore?
Thank you, Liz. So I'm going to pick up on the long duration storage, Garish, and going back to, I think it's your second to last slide where you had the 5 focus areas. Have you brought those to the board, the full board already, or you're proposing them before us to bring to the full board? And if you have, and I forgot, my follow-up question is, how flexible are we in revising those goals based on, the recent happenings that we've been talking about? Because I just think based on what happened in Texas and what happened last year with the wildfires, the long-term strategy should be one of the 5 focus areas. And so when I look at the focus areas, for example, numbers 4 and 5, I think they're close enough where you have the community engagement and the community outreach. And I know you explained the differences between those two and how you look at those two things differently. But I'm wondering if one of those 5 focus areas should be called out as some kind of long-term strategy. So that struck me when I was looking at that. And I know we started with 19, and I completely support the approach and strategy to try to narrow the focus to 5. That's manageable, that's doable, that's easy to remember. But that it struck me, and of course you brought this to us before, but just thinking about what happened in Texas and everything else, it struck me that we didn't have anything on that list that really focused on, long-term strategy. What's our plan there?
Thank you very much for that, Nisa. So we can actually, Andrea would put that slide up maybe. So this is kind of like, we've got to do, it's an all of the above that we've got to do. So first, we did bring this to the board as part in October to be approved along with the updated strategic plan. And the key thing here is the subtitle, in addition to business as usual. So the point of this is, these are things that we are not yet doing, and these are things that are going to come to you that may be new. Like, for example, equity, right? We just weren't as focused on it. Said we need to raise the profile of what we're doing on equity. So then maybe in a year or two, it becomes business as usual of like, yep, this is a priority. So Monica and her group, Mel and her group, have this right in the middle of their target zone when it comes to reliability. So reliability and long duration storage. Monica is heading up the joint CCA group on the LDS RFO. I'm obviously working with CC Power. So it is taking up a tremendous amount of our time and our focus. So part of this could be, so I'm not asking for approval of these 5, but I think maybe as we continue this discussion, how do we bring it back to the entire board, right? So I can extract some of the things that we have. So I'm open to it. I'm open to anything of how we bring it up to the board as, hey, this is a focus for us. If I may end with one thing, the enterprise with systems, metrics, and tools, to me, is a really important piece when it comes to avoiding or managing energy price risk. Because this is where, so it's actually the first two, right? So for example, additional resources and the kinds of resources we want. You've already approved for us a data scientist and a data engineer. We're going to hire 2 people temporarily to help with these enterprise-wide systems. So we need to have that data analytics strength to be able to forecast effectively and do our energy risk management effectively. So that's where I see this coming in. What's not here, which is what you're bringing up, maybe is at the legislative side and regulatory side, how do we raise the profile for reliability? And maybe that could be an additional focus area. So easy for us to bring back to the board, Nisa.
Thanks, Girish. And then my second question, Texas. I came into this meeting hoping that you would cover it because, there's forecasting and there's forecasting. And I think when we all followed the news, and I'm sure we all had friends and colleagues and maybe family members in Texas and heard on a daily basis what they were going through. And how, can we as a CCA figure out how to get ahead of that? And that's a short-term and long-term plan. And I know you talked about that. But I was just thinking, based on what the governor said, a lot of people attributed it wrongly to our industry. But still, as you said, it's all of the above. And so I'm just curious, Girish, anything specific, not at the state level that you mentioned, but what are some of the things we can do to get ahead of that? And I think some of it may just be messaging too, where people really don't fully understand how the energy supply works. But anything else that we can do at this level to really respond to what we saw in Texas and get ahead of it? Because there was forecasting, but they just could not predict what happened in Texas was going to happen in Texas. And so, it's not far-fetched to say we could have a similar situation here in California. So just talking more about Texas. And as a side question, I wasn't sure if it impacted any of our supplies. Do we have any supply base in Texas that got impacted by the snowstorms?
Nisa, fantastic questions and framing here. I'll start with the last one. Monica and Ian managed our hedging really well. So though prices in Southern California went up to $900 a megawatt hour, we really were not affected because we were hedging. If California has a price cap of $1,000. Your point, this is what scares me, right? So it is what happened in Texas can happen here. Now, I'm going to say something, Bruce Carney may crucify me, and some of you may also, but I'm going to mention this. When we say we are carbon free, we need to be very clear that this is annual accounting of carbon. And we have electricity that needs to be generated every hour of every day. And today, and for the foreseeable future, for many years, natural gas is necessary. And so as we message to get credibility, and this is the thing, we are transitioning to a clean energy system. And we need to transition responsibly. And it's not an either or. It's not renewables or natural gas. We know natural gas is going to be transitioned to become a smaller and smaller part of our portfolio. But that is something, and let me connect this to one of the things, letters that CC Power received was saying, adopt a policy where you will not contract for any fossil fuel generation. Like, sorry, I'm never going to make that recommendation as an electrical engineer. And it's like reliability. You have to keep the lights on. So that's a messaging thing. How do we transition the grid? So there are lots of opportunities, things we can do, right? I think resiliency at the distribution level is a big deal and a big opportunity for us. That, we've just started with the Sunrun contract called Lights on Silicon Valley, where we will be providing rebates up to $1,300 for battery storage systems in customers' homes. I think we should continue to ask for open access distribution systems where that data is open so we can let the market operate and keep our rates down. I think investing in forecasting, not just at our level, but at the state level, much more granular forecasting. And again, open access. You can't have PG&E doing its. So I think you're bringing up some very, very important questions. I'm not sure we'll answer it fully now, but how do we message this transition is going to be very important. Yeah.
Nisa, you okay?
Next.
Director Alahi, you have a question, I see.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is really important discussion. And Girish, first of all, congratulations on being elected as the chairman of the Joint Power Committee. I've got a couple of questions. One, I guess, directly to that one. You guys have been approached to adopt some policies at the joint power level. And the question is, there going to be any contradiction with what you adopt there, or whether that's going to be first have to be approved by the local, energy committees, so that there's no conflict. I mean, you're not going to be adopting policies that have not been approved by the members, or will you be doing that? I guess that's my first question.
So if we are politically tone deaf, we will do one option, but that's not the one that we're going to take. We will be consulting with you to make sure that we are aligned, right? So whether it's prevailing wage or project labor agreement or environmental policies. So I think that's where the opportunity comes for us at SVCE. Let's have our discussion with the SVCE board where we adopt our policies in each one of those areas. And then that will give me direction as to what I need, how I need to be pushing for the similar policies at CC Power. Now, the thing is, obviously, you all have control over SVCE's policies, but when we get to CC Power, we don't have control, we can influence it, and it's going to require some discussion and iteration with that CC Power board, and each one of those CEOs are going to be going back to their individual boards to be either getting direction or so that dialogue is going to continue. I figure it'll take us about 2 to 3 months to go through this and adopt policies at both CC Power and for us at SVC.
Yeah, I understand that. I thought it might be simpler if the power just says that's not what we do, that we have to go back to the individual members. So we don't end up with a conflict with the power authority, and it's not, and it probably won't happen. I think we'll probably be on the same page for most of the time, but there's a possibility that there could be a real conflict with what the power authority wants and what the membership wants. Because within the membership, you also have different cities with different goals. So would it be simpler just to adopt a policy saying we don't deal with that, our members deal with that?
That's one way of doing it, but that's not what the thing is, then every project may require a separate kind of negotiation. So like say we enter into a project, I have to come back to the board to get approval, right? So what you're saying, I think, is I come back to the board and the board will say, hey, this doesn't align with our policies, so don't enter into this. That's not going to be super efficient, but I think in some cases we may have to do case by case, project by project kind of negotiation. But I think, so what I'm thinking about is there may be what I call some universal principles that we adopt as CC Power. And we want to make sure that those are aligned with, the overall ethos of CC Power. But there may be some things that just we need to work out. Say, for example, there's one ask of, if you do a project, make sure that you give preference to the local CCA. Second, look for projects in Northern California. And third, look for projects in California. Well, we have someone in Southern California who's already interested. So obviously that isn't going to work. But I do think there may be some on obviously prevailing wage. I'm not sure about project labor agreement. I think some may want project labor agreement to be a blanket policy, and others may want it to be project by project negotiation. I think overall the comments we've got so far, Javed, has been the people who have commented want CC Power to adopt policies so they don't have to keep coming back to our meetings. It would be applied for every project, and they want it to be aligned with policies that you all have adopted for us.
I think that's a good way to start. So it may be a good idea to bring some universal policies to each member and get us to sign off, and then we won't have a conflict. Because I'm really concerned, otherwise you got two separate boards going in different directions. And
that's exactly. So one of the things we are talking, we're going to bring up, because it's going to take a few iterations to get this done. And so my thinking is I would like to get this done in about 2 to 3 months. And that's what this ad hoc committee is doing, ad hoc committee of CEOs. It's like, what are the ones that we can just, it should be kind of a no-brainer. And we'll see, we'll end up with 10 members. Maybe we won't have unanimity, but that's part of that's part of a JPA, right? We'll come up there and maybe there'll be a super majority that thinks it's a good idea, and the chips are going to fall where they may.
All right. I don't want to beat that around the bush too much on that one. You had recommended cutting down some of the strategic goals from 19 to 5, which is an excellent suggestion. I'm just trying to figure out what the couple more were that you did not put on that list. One I would ask you to look at some more is keeping an eye on our competition, because our rates depend on PG&E. And obviously PG&E is in the investment business and the money-making business, and they'll be doing things that help them out. And some of that might be throwing mud at us at some point, or it may not be. But in any case, we need to keep an eye on that. And I would say that should be part of the strategic goals. And it may just not be PG&E is our competitor. Obviously, the people we are buying from are, in a sense, they want to get the best prices too. So I would suggest you think about adding that in. The other thing on Texas, which obviously, some of these people will say whatever they want. I'm trying to figure out, was that caused mainly because of transmission issues or generation issues?
Yeah, it's not transmission. It was generation and demand. So on the generation side, basically there was a fuel supply. So there was a gas shortage when the wellheads were frozen. So basically fuel wasn't going through the pipes. The natural gas plants and the nuclear plants. So there's a nuclear plant which generated about 1,500 megawatts. They had their water supply and inlet water supply frozen. So the instrumentation there basically shut it down. Some of the substations and natural gas plants actually had their instrumentation frozen. And so this became, and the grid operator has to maintain frequency of the grid at 60 hertz. So they can basically go down to 59.8, or they can go between 59.8 to 60.2 is the frequency that they can fluctuate. As the nuclear plant went down, the natural gas plants went down. That's going to bring down frequency, and the load continued to increase because of the cold. And so they basically had to shut this down. So it was essentially the gas, and then the wind turbines were frozen over essentially. So they didn't buy the heating package. And so this is part of, when you think about forecasting for the future and forecasting extreme weather, and when you think about housing, Texas has the largest concentration of housing that has been built in the country over the last 20 years. And close to about 80 to 90% of that housing has been built as all electric. And so when we went to all electric, and Texas is known for a summer peaking load, not winter peaking. But with all these buildings being heated and extreme cold, the load went up to something they did not expect. So it was both ways. And I want to address your previous comment about competition. Sorry, first of all, I want to clarify. We're not reducing the number of goals from 19 to 5. 19 is in our approved strategic plan, but we kind of categorized those 19 and kind of pulled out, hey, these are these 5 focus areas of new kind of things we want to pay attention to. So that's all these 5 are. And your specific thing about competition, it's a very good point. This is one of the resources that Amrit is going to talk about. We're looking at someone to come and help us with exactly that. There's someone who has a lot of experience in past California deregulated markets and in Texas deregulated markets. So they'll be helping us with that.
Good. Well, thank you for clarifying that and for explaining Texas. Do we have the same kind of issues for our generation? Because I know I thought transmission lines might have played a part because of all the freezing since they were exposed and on the outside, and whether it would be something to consider to have more transmission lines buried underground to avoid those kind of impacts.
Yeah, and this is where you're going to hit the affordability issue, because undergrounding high voltage transmission lines of that voltage, it basically costs 10 times as much to underground these high voltage lines of 200 kV and above. It is extremely expensive, and so affordability will go out of the way. So for us in California, our issue is going to be importing power. So transmission will be an issue for us. Importing power from the Northwest, there is going to be a squeeze on Northwest resources as all these Northwestern states and Western states become more clean and they have clean energy mandates. So they're going to have less and less to sell to us. We are highly dependent on imports. So I think transmission will be an issue. At the same time, we also, to get to 100% carbon free on an hourly basis, we have to buy wind from outside the state. And in order to get wind from outside the state, we have to build transmission. And getting through environmental issues is going to be a challenge for us. And that's why the state and us, we are also looking at offshore wind as another option. I think for us, so it's going to be a bit of all of the above, Javed, where transmission is going to be an issue for us. I think the way we can manage it to a certain extent is by investing in some resiliency initiatives for us.
Great. Thank you so much. And I was just curious, when I first came on the board, you sent a book to everybody, I guess,
Yes.
on the electricity history. I thought it was really a good book to read. Are you still giving those out?
Yes, our new members get it. And there is another book that we have just distributed to staff, and then we plan on distributing it to you, which is Bill Gates's new book about climate solutions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Girish. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Director Abikoga.
Thank you. I have all these little tidbit things, questions, and just trying to figure out how to make it more general and sound more intelligent. And I think to me, I think it's coming down to a question about it's tied to like resiliency and some of these other efforts, but I guess it just sort of jogged my mind about or jogged my memory, and the question of where we are with some of the programs and initiatives we started. So for instance, I've been hearing through my air district work with the PSPS incidents, there's an increase in use of generators, gas. So then, I know we had started the virtual power plant. Like, where are we in programs like that? The other area I was thinking about is actually that yesterday in my mobile source committee meeting, we were presented with, it looks like there's actually more funding coming in the EV infrastructure area. So I was just wondering, like, where we are with these programs. How can I don't know if you have a huge list of priorities already, but I feel like there's this time opportunity right now, you know, with the change in the federal administration, like, to maybe have some to be able to. I wanted us to be able to capitalize, and are we set to do that? Where are we with, you know, these programs that we've started? Like, what can we do to accelerate it? Because, like, I just feel like this is the opportunity and I don't want us to miss it. So that's my first question for you. And then the second one has to do with legislation, so I'll ask that after.
Okay. So I'll refer you to, and I'll also send after the meeting, I'll send an email to the board. We had Amy provide the quarterly programs update in January. So that gives a status on all the programs. And then every month, we also give you a monthly update on what we're doing with programs. So we did get an email around the BACMD. I think there was BACMD was looking at a diesel generator permit at a facility in Santa Clara, and there was a question that got brought to us as to, can any of our programs help with that? So our response was just a little bit. I think the Sunrun program is one, the CR program is another. So you've set aside $5 million for resiliency, and that's for critical facilities. And then Amy also has some programs on innovative rates. So why don't we'll send you that information, but I'm also going to ask Don Bray to fill out the answer because he's more familiar with this than I am.
So I will jump in very specifically on electric vehicles. So the Cal EVIP program, as you recall, we joined into about 1.5 years ago, along with San Jose Clean Energy, Peninsula Clean Energy, Silicon Valley Power, and also Palo Alto. That program was actually conducted in December. And we had, from our service territory, about $10 million available in that program. It was snapped up very quickly, and the applications are in the process of being finalized, and the people that are going to get money associated with that are in the process of being notified. So we haven't made a big point of doing a report out on it yet until next of kin are notified. And Margaret, I did hear that I think there were some good awards in Mountain View, but I know some of that stuff, some of that information is still coming out. And the program is administered actually by CSE, which is a nonprofit that operates at the state level and manages this funding. So we're in and around it and close to it, but the details of actually doing the communication, at least the first line of communication are through them. So that is a very significant amount of money, and it is going, we're going to see a lot of movement in terms of deployment of level 2 and level 3 charging infrastructure here over this next year, beginning very soon.
So, excuse the interruption here. I'm going to do a time check. It is now 3:40, and we have a massively important discussion coming up on the mid-year budget adjustment. I want to make sure, is anyone, I'm going to guess we're going to go to at least 4:30. Are we good on time for everybody? I'm seeing yeses across the board. Okay, so thank you. Unless there's any more questions at this point, I'd like to open up the public hearing. I have one speaker and then we can come back. I'd like to move on to the next discussion about 345, if at all possible.
Yeah, I just had a couple of small questions, if I could ask those.
Yes.
One is I was trying to figure out, is there going to be any effect? There's a huge debt issue that's coming up with PG&E and maybe a little bit with us. Is that going to affect PCIA as far as the charges that the PG&E will charge us?
No, not PCIA. It's just going to be we're going to set aside about $1.5 million of our reserves. Basically, it'll end up being a much higher write-off than in the past.
Okay.
And each one will do their own. PG&E will do theirs, we'll do ours.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it doesn't increase our PCIA cost. The second question was, is there a possibility of doing any cap and trade? I mean, we're a clean energy thing. Is there something we can trade to get subsidized as far as our clean energy is concerned?
No, we do participate, and we can look at this later. There's the low carbon fuel standard program. So part of CARB's overall reduction, there's a low carbon fuel standard, cap and trade, and us basically reducing our emissions as part of the integrated resource plan. So when Monica comes to you and says, I need to buy this renewable energy in order to meet these goals, that's basically CARB saying, this is how you're going to do it. So we don't actually have anything to do with cap and trade, but cap and trade takes care of one part of the emission reductions. And there are other ways that we participate, but not through cap and trade.
Great, thank you. Thank you for letting me ask those questions.
Of course. All right, unless no other comments, we'll move to the public hearing portion of the meeting, and I believe we have a speaker.
Yes, Bruce Carney. Whenever you're ready.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
So Girish, have no fear. I will not be calling for any crucifixions. I do have a question and then some comments. So my question is, I seem to remember that when a customer goes into non-payment status, at some point, they revert to being a PG&E customer, not an SVCE customer. Could you, after I'm done, explain that, or explain that I have the wrong idea? Because certainly that could have a material effect on the number of customers the agency has going forward. Another thing I wanted to point out, which the board members might already be aware of because it's in the joint rate mailer that went out a few months ago, is that if you look at our Green Prime 100% renewable product, PG&E has a similar product called Solar Choice, and theirs is less expensive than ours. But if you go to the default products, we're a little bit less expensive than PG&E, but they are also in 2019 100% carbon free. And because neither PG&E or SVCE typically report hour by hour carbon freeness, as Girish mentioned, it's an annualized total. My suspicion is that SVCE does a lot better on its hour by hour carbon freeness, but doesn't publicize it, therefore doesn't get any credit. And at some point, there may be a need to inform our customers how we're doing on that metric. And I would like that to happen as soon as it possibly can. Another comment about project labor agreements and prevailing wage, et cetera, is that SVCE lives in the least Berkeley 60s part of the Bay Area. If you were to meet my equivalents in other counties, you would find that they pretty much, to a man and a woman, hate nuclear 100%, would shut Diablo Canyon down tomorrow if they could, hate large central utility scale solar, and think everything should be at the grid edge, and really don't understand the economics of running a utility at all. So I would bet good money that if CC Power does in fact adopt a policy, its policy will be similar to what you would expect from the Berkeley City Council, not the Monte Sereno City Council. And I see I'm running out of time, so I'll just stop there and look forward to joining the full board meeting in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Bruce. Is there any other comment or discussion on the director's report at this point? If there are, you can, of course, add comments. I see Director Tyson. You can also write comments in the chat, and I'm going to guess staff can follow up on those as well, so you don't forget what you're thinking. And Director Tyson.
I don't actually see a chat feature in this meeting. I think
We've disabled that function.
Yeah. So let me just quickly say a couple of comments. I came into this meeting hoping we'd talk about Texas, and we did. So I'm glad to see that, because some of the things that happened there, the thing that struck me, a couple of things struck me. They're so deregulated. They had consumers paying wholesale rate, which most of the time helps them, but then man, did they get slammed. And I think there's a message to us to say, what is the right amount of deregulation and how does that really help us? Because I think it made us, relatively speaking, look good in that sense. The other thing that struck me was the extreme weather, and I saw a clip, I think it was on Colbert Show, I don't know. 10 years ago to the day, they had the same sort of thing happen in Texas, and they had the guy 10 years ago saying, this could happen next year, it could happen in 10 years. And we should really get ourselves ready. So in terms of this whole resiliency against environmental things is just something I think we can't keep learning that without getting some egg on our face. And can these things happen? I remember December 1990. I was working at a chemical plant in Pittsburgh, California, and we had temperatures in the teens for about a week, and all our water pipes froze, and then they burst once they melted. And we thought, wow, this can't ever happen here. And so just things can happen here. So that's my one comment. My second comment was something we didn't talk about here today, but in terms of some aspect of how do we encourage people to switch to electric energy. One of the things we talked about last board meeting was this time of use pricing, and how by increasing the cost from 4 to 9 p.m., we could, in effect, try to moderate the duck curve. And I got my PG&E bill, so it made sense to me. And I got my PG&E bill a couple days ago, and I looked, and I saw they've already implemented peak pricing from 4 to 9 p.m., and it's 1 cent a kilowatt hour difference. It's 29.3 versus 30.3. So just a thought for you, Girish, to say, this is no incentive whatsoever. So there's something fishy about that. So that's the end of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, this was a discussion item, and I will volunteer for Girish and staff that you can follow up with them on any additional questions. And we will now move to the second agenda item, which is a discussion on the, I'm going to read it here. I changed it. Let's see. There we go. A discussion on the mid-year budget update, and that's Amrit. You have the floor, or the screen, depending on how you look at it.
Okay, good afternoon, directors. So I will walk you through the mid-year budget update that we'll be recommending that the board adopt in March. So just as a background, the annual budget for the current fiscal year, which starts in October of 2020 and ends in September 2021, was adopted in September of 2020. And at that time, what we were showing was that we would be contributing about 8.2 million to the reserves. We are now projecting instead to be using 6 million from the reserves to cover our expenses. And this is, if you remember the last month's discussion, this is pretty much the overall numbers are pretty much in line with what we had talked about, with some drivers that are contributing to the number changing a little bit up and down. And I'll walk through that in the next slide. So the big driver contributing to the reduction in our margins is decrease in revenues. And the biggest drivers are coming from the PCI increases and PG&E gen rate increases. So just as a reminder, in the original budget, when the budget was set, we were assuming an increase in PCIA from 3.2 cents a kilowatt hour to 4.8 cents a kilowatt hour in October. And then that it would reduce down to 3.7 cents in January, and that there would be no change to the PG&E generation rates. And at the same time, we would reduce our discount from 4% to 1%. But what has happened and what we've reflected in the media budget is that the PCIA actually increased. The increase didn't happen until January of 2021, and it went from 3.2 cents a kilowatt hour to 4.25 cents a kilowatt hour. And then next month, we're expecting it to increase by about 4.59 cents a kilowatt hour. And the PG&E generation rate in January increased 4%, and it expected to increase, PG&E generation rate decreased by 4%, and it's expected to increase by slightly in about 1.8% in March. And then in January, we reduced our discount rate from 4 to 1%. And at the time when we talked about the upcoming January rate increase, we had done our estimated impact, and we told you at that time that the impact would be about $5 million. And then last month we said we were expecting that impact without doing detailed modeling, extensive modeling. We were saying it was going to be about 4 million. So that comes to about 9 million. And then, as Girish mentioned, we're seeing large increases in our unpaid bills, customer balances, and we have a slide on slide 12 in the appendix that shows how our receivables are getting higher and higher. So to account for that, we're adding $1.5 million in budget for uncollectibles. And this is about 4.5 times higher than the number we experienced in 2019. 3.5 times higher than the number we experienced in 2019. So that brings us to about $10.5 million increase. And then the remaining increase comes from the more precise modeling that we've done, where we actually go through each customer account and evaluate the impacts. So overall, we are showing now that we expect for the fiscal year, the revenues would be about $12.7 million lower. And this accounts for actuals through December and our projected decrease going forward. The next big item, the biggest item in our supply cost, as you guys know, is the power supply expenses. That makes us the bulk of our expenses. For the most part, given the ups and downs, we're expecting now that the power supply expenses to come pretty much in line with what we had in the original budget, with a slight increase of $0.6 million. Then we have a slight increase in our operating budget. We're showing $0.2 million. And most of this is coming from an adjustment to account for our actual customer account, which affects our data management fee that we pay to Calpine for the services they provide. We corrected the number in our budgeting model to reflect what the level of counts that we have right now. So there was a slight uptick in that led to the operating cost. Now, in terms of our labor expenses, even though we have significant vacancies, we should be underrunning that budget. But for the year, we're expecting to even out for two reasons. One is when we established the budget in 2020, we accounted for that, the fact that we would have difficulty in filling to be at full staff all the time. So there was some level of vacancy baked into the forecast. And then the other offsets are coming from the two external consultants that we're planning to hire, and Girish touched on that as well. One is a consultant to work on our direct access. So he will be looking at customized deal offerings. He's got a lot of experience in direct access. And comes from a background in Texas. So he'll be looking at customized deal offerings and and analyzing the direct access market for us and how we can extend those offerings to other customers than the couple that we were contemplating right now that we've discussed with the board in the past. And then one other thing, addition was that we added a senior governmental affairs position in November. So when we put all those together, the employment expenses are pretty close to the original budget. Then we, in the non-operating revenues, the 0.8 million decrease is largely coming from a reduction in our interest income. As you guys know, the interest rates are really low right now, and that's affecting what we're earning on the cash that we have at our bank. So that brought it down by about 0.8 million. So when you add that together, that takes us from 8.2 million to 6 million. Okay. And any questions on the high-level walkthrough of the numbers? Okay, Andrea, next slide, please. So in this slide, I'm showing now what the actual balances are for each of the line items.
Excuse me, Amrit. Javed, you have your hand up. Do you want to wait to the end, or would you like to ask your question now?
I can wait till then.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. So here we're showing the actual balances. So you can see the energy revenues from 364 million, we're down to about 252 million, reflecting the 12.7 million change, and showing each of the line items and how we come to the new negative $6 million number. One additional item I want to point out too that we're also asking that the board approve is a $5 million contingency funding to account for fluctuations in power supply costs. And the reason for that is, as you know, power supply expenses are subject to market. You know, there are a lot of risk drivers that affect the power supply cost, as you've experienced from the Texas market recently, and as we experienced in the last summer. Load can increase significantly or decrease significantly as well from what we forecast. And the power supply, the market wholesale and CAISO costs could increase. And that can introduce additional expenses for us. And we want the staff to be able to react to changing market conditions without the ability or without the need to coming back to the board each time and asking, which may not be practical, given that we have to react to market in a real-time manner. So we don't want to exceed the authorized budget of 235. So we're asking for additional 5 million to cover for these fluctuations. And how did we come up with the $5 million? So we have a risk model. It's a probabilistic based model that we work with a consultant that looks at variability in these risk drivers. So how could the load vary? How could power prices vary at the peak off-peak resolutions? And what's the relationship among these variables? And then we project out at various, basically build out a distribution of outcomes. And so when we looked at the power supply expense distribution, we said at the 95th percentile, that number can be 5 million higher than our expected number of $235 million. So another way of saying is that we're saying there's a 5% chance it could still be higher than $5 million change. And those could be the black swan type events that can contribute to that, such as what we saw in Texas. So we're asking for the 5 million in contingency again, so that the power procurement team, power supply team can react to changing market conditions and have the authorized funding to manage the portfolio. Any questions on this point?
So I do, and I'm sorry if I'm totally missing you. What does this slide have to do with 5 million?
What is 5 have?
Yeah, so you're discussing asking for 5 million?
Yes. So it's
the numbers on the slide. So one of the things that we try and do at this board is we kind of test your story and your graphics. We're asking for a request for an additional 5 million, but I
Yeah,
don't see anything in the graph.
yes,
Bonds
good point.
5 million request.
That's a good point, Liz. So we're asking for I didn't want to add the 5 million to the 235 million we're asking for power supply expense, because if I did that, then the margin would go from 6 million to negative 6 million. And that's not what we are expecting. On an expected basis, we're expecting to end the year with negative 6 million. Again, this is based on a forecast. So we have actuals through December, but we're looking at a forecast based on a forecast of demand and the market prices that we're observing in the market today. So market prices, for example, for May, August, September are traded each and every single day. They go up and down. So at a time when we did this forecast, we look at a snapshot of the market and say, what is the market today? And then we say, okay, we're going to value our portfolio at that level, and that comes up with 235 million. But if I were to model the risk of it, it would show that because the 235 million is the mean of that distribution. In other words, that's the expected cost. But likewise, the cost could be lower because load comes in lower, or power supply expenses come in lower, or it could be higher. So we looked at the 95th percentile and said, well, what is that number? That number is closer to 240 million. So essentially, we're asking that you approve power supply expense line item at $240 million.
Okay.
But that's not an expected cost. That's just a contingency so that the staff doesn't have to come back and ask for additional authorization. They can react to changing market conditions, because once the board approves.
I think some of us or most of us follow all of that, but I'm going to see what others say. But I don't think your graph explains your story. Margaret, you had your hand up next, I believe.
Thank you. If it's okay to start asking questions.
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation.
Sorry, Margaret, one thing. Have you gotten through everything yet, Amrit?
There's some more slides, but I'll take questions.
Go ahead.
These are the important slides.
Yeah, go ahead and finish your presentation.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted, but I wasn't
worries.
following what he was saying. Okay, thank you. So go ahead and finish if you would.
Okay, so Andrea, let's go to the next slide. We'll come back to this. So here we're showing the reserves. The good news is we have, even though we're projecting to be negative $6 million for the year, we have healthy reserves to absorb that. So at the end of the fiscal year that ended in September 2020, we had reserves level at that time of about $157 million. And if we were to add 8 million as we were budgeted in the middle graph, we would have gone up to 165 million. But now with the use of 6 million, we're going to end up with 151 million. And that's still above our target levels and gives us about 13 days of cash on hand. So we're well positioned to absorb the $6 million impact to reserves. And then on the right side, I have a note here. We have about 17.7 million in programs and CRCR funds that we haven't spent yet. And that's not reflected in this number because that's a set aside for the programs. Next slide, please. So these are the position titles that Grish mentioned earlier. As we're maturing in organizations and as the staff's roles are changing, we want to change some of our titles to reflect the current duties that the staff is performing, as well as improve our ability to attract and recruit talent that aligns more with the job title. And again, this is not an increase in headcount, and there's minimal budget impact because of some positions the salary band may be slightly different, but it's the same headcount, but we're changing the position titles. For example, in the account services and customer relations area, we're changing energy consulting title to energy services lead energy services analyst title. And in the regulatory and legislative policy area, we're changing the manager title to the principal policy analyst title, because this reflects more of the analytical role that we're looking at. Someone who can come in and look at the regulatory issues and can translate as to what that means for strategically what that means to our business. So it's more analytical, and we also don't want to reduce the overlap with the management provided by the director in the position. And we're also kind of in each of these categories broadbanding them, because we're saying at the same time we want to create a policy analyst, senior policy, and principal policy analyst level. Part of that is to reflect the titles, and also sometimes when we're interviewing for positions, we may interview for a principal analyst position, but we may find someone, we may come to an outcome where that someone we're interviewing may not quite fit that role, but we may think it may fit very well in the senior policy role, or vice versa. We are looking for someone in senior level, but we think would be better suited in the principal level. Likewise, in the finance area, we had Eric Aceto leave our group, and he was an administrative analyst. But looking at what we need in the organization, where the greatest needed, we still need the analyst role. So we're going to create admin roles. So we're going to leave that position title. But what we're looking for is a financial analyst type of a resource, someone who can come in with an accounting background, budgeting background, and can work on some areas of risk management. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so that concludes the presentation. So for the ask is that the board adopt the new budget which draws $6 million from the reserves, and again provides $5 million in contingency fund for the for potential fluctuations in power supply expenses. Okay, I see a lot of questions. So George?
So actually, we're going to start with Javed.
Sorry.
Javed, and then Margaret, and then George.
Thank you. Yeah, I need to kind of compare what the original budget was when you guys proposed it last year for 2021, because effectively we're about 14.1 million difference between what was presented at whenever it was presented last year. So if you can pull that up, I think it'll be helpful, or maybe at the board meeting we can look at. The other thing I have a question on is when you say revenue and you show a shortfall in revenue, but the items that you include in there seem to be have to do more with expenses. I mean, how did revenue drop? Are you talking about net revenue, or are you talking about gross revenue?
So I'm talking about, when I talk about revenue decreasing, is because the rate we will charge our customers will go down, because we're offsetting the increase in PCIA so that we remain competitive with what PG&E is offering. So that reduces what we charge our customers, and that brings down our revenues.
So the rates to customers has actually gone down from last year?
Yes.
Okay, so that's that was your slide 5, I guess. And can you pull that up again if you don't mind?
Andrea, can you?
Could I ask for clarification? I don't think the rate for the customers is going down. The cost of the power that we're charging is able to charge is going down, but the overall rate is going up because the PCIA went up.
Yeah, so that would be an expense item. I'm not sure why the revenue comes down. I'm just talking about net revenue.
Well, I'll let somebody else answer that. So
didn't we have lower demand though as a result of this COVID thing?
No,
yeah, so
less margin.
So the number of so in terms of load forecast, we haven't changed our load forecast. So we're still using the same forecast that we used when we adopted the budget, which was where we were projecting to come in at 8.2 million. But again, the revenue line is strictly lower because the revenues we'll get from our customers, because the rate we were charging them is lower. And the reason we're charging lower rate is, as we went through the last couple of board meetings, we reduced our rates to match, to basically offset the PCIA increases, so that our customers would be and still provide 1% discount to PG&E, so we could still remain competitive with PG&E.
And I appreciate that, but I'm totally confused because the PCIA is an expense item, I would think. And the revenue, I don't think you've got any customer out there who thinks his rates have gone down as far as the check they actually write.
So
Are you suggesting that most customers are now writing a lower check for their cost of electricity, or?
Yeah. I'm going to just jump in for a second and have Don Bray explain a little bit. But Java, just to step back a little bit. So this is what we presented to you last month, and maybe we should have brought that slide again. What the customer pays, they pay us our rate, and they pay PG&E the PCIA. And we take the sum of both those and compare it to PG&E's gen rate. So when the PCIA goes up, in order to keep everything else being equal, in order to keep our discount, we have to lower our gen rate. So that's why our revenues will have to go down. The thing is, these are moving parts, right? So PG&E will increase its gen rate. So when you saw one of the slides that he showed, they were decreasing their gen rates by 4% in January, increasing it 1.8% in March. So that's the gen rate change. And then they were increasing PCIA also. So for us to keep our discount, we have to lower our rate so that the customer's net, the customer in a way is writing two checks, one to PG&E's checking account and one to our checking account. And so we have to lower the amount that we're going to take from the customer so that the sum of both their checks is less than what they would pay PG&E. That's why you'll find a revenue decrease when the PCI goes up.
Yeah, no, I understood we had to lower it. So you're saying the customer is writing a higher check, but more of it's going to the PG&E than to us.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
exactly.
we never receive the PCIA funds. Those go straight to PG&E.
Got it. And so then my next question is this totally unanticipated? I mean, when the budget was presented to us last year, were we expecting a 6 million shortfall, or is this something that just kept up?
So yeah, we can go back to
actually, it's a 14 million shortfall, just to have the right number.
We can go back to slide number 2, Andrea. And so when we set the budget, we were expecting PCIA first to go from 3.2 cents to 4.8 cents in October, but then to drop back down to 3.7 cents. But what actually happened is the rate increased to 4.25 cents in January, and now expected to go up to 4.29 cents. So if I were to take a weighted average of these numbers, we were expecting it's about a 31% increase versus a 25% increase. So it's 6% larger than what we anticipated on a rough weighted average basis.
Amrit, if you wouldn't mind, I'm just going to add one more thing to you. So Javed, your question about did we anticipate this? No. When we brought you the budget in September, we thought we will be adding $8 million to the reserves. Now, the other thing that we have told you, maybe ad nauseum, is the PCIA is a black box, and it is a volatile black box. So our ability to forecast the PCIA, it's very difficult, and it's not just us. This is for CCAs all over the state. We have introduced legislation to try and open up that black box. We have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars through CalCCA to get forecasts. Unfortunately, the improvement we've got there is very small. So to answer your question, nope, that's not what we expected, but that's why we carry reserves and very hefty reserves in order to manage this volatility.
Yeah, no, I know this is not an easy job, and I think we are all in that black box. I'm just trying to see if I can get a sliver of light in there. What I would really appreciate is if you can put the budget you gave us last year with the budget that you're now, where we are at the mid-year budget, and explain,
we have that.
And explain, where the difference comes in, if it's the PCIA part or if it's something else. That way we can say, okay, yeah, it's a $14 million. I mean, that's a huge difference between the projected budget and actual budget. So if you can give us something to help us out with understanding that, that would be very helpful.
So Andre, if you can go to slide 3, please. So this, Javed tries to answer that.
Doesn't do it.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It is. So when we set the budget, revenues we were expecting 264 million, but now we're expecting 251 million. So that's a 12.7 million.
And so the question is, why is that difference? Is it all just PCI related, or is it something else related? So what I'm trying to
so then
do
we
a
go back,
deep dive inside that.
Yeah. So
That's
biggest driver of that is PCIA.
And how much?
And
that's a question, I guess. I'm just watching, guys, and you don't have to do it right now. You can present it at a later time. So
yeah,
I think I understand what you're asking for, and we can do that for the board, which is off that 12.687 million, right? So this is the variance column. How much of this is due to the PG&E gen rate, and how much of it is due to the PCIA? We'll get that breakout because in the presentation to the board. And I'm also thinking to the board, we had a very simple chart last month on the PCIA and our gen rate, saying we had an arrow saying the PCIA was going up, therefore our gen rate had to go down to maintain the 1% discount. So I think that's something else we could add.
Great, thank you.
Oh, whoa, that one.
That's the benefit of these discussions, to help make sure that the conversation is clear for us and then ultimately the board. And see that difference there, you could actually put a dollar amount to.
Yes.
Okay, Javed, you're all set. We'll go to Margaret.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I had just some similar thoughts along the same line, and I think it's just more about the presentation and the way I'm used to looking at our city budget, and this is a little different because I think it's if on the slide with the budget variance, it says mid-year budget. So in my mind, that means, where are we at this point in time in terms of our expenses and revenues? So I think it's just a changing of the word to, the adjusted budget based on the changes that have occurred. And then, yes, if you could break down the revenues and the categories under that, and then expenses categories under that, and just bunch it together, that would be helpful, just to have it a little more organized and easier to read. And then I was thinking about the $5 million reserve that you're asking for. The slide that you showed with the reserves with the footnote about the 17.7 million for programs, I'm wondering if we just need to create another reserve fund, if that would be helpful for this, for the variance and the energy, the sourcing, and then have those listed in whatever different colored bars so that we have the total. I guess my question is, how fungible are these reserve funds? So can we have them all, listed so So we know exactly how much we really have. So I'm not sure if the 17.7 is included in that bar right now or not. It's not. So for me, it would be helpful to include all of that and then just list the different reserve funds, just so we have a, an overall understanding of where we are financially. And then I would ask, maybe since we now are, have several years under our belt, if we could have a comparison from like the past year or the past couple of years, so we have a sense of where how we're trending. If that's doable, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes.
Yep, and these reserve funds are 100% fungible.
So just to have some place where we can
Got
have a record of it would be helpful. So, yes, it's 5 million is great, but if we can just, then separate it out, some color coded in a different way so we know it's reserved for that purpose, but it's all still part of our overall reserves, that would be helpful.
A lot of cities actually have an economic reserve, an emergency reserve, and a PERS reserve, and a blah, blah, blah reserve. And we keep track of them all. Okay, George.
Thank you. And just to clarify, the purpose of our review here today is so that we understand the mid-year budget, and then also to a certain extent provide feedback for the presentation to the whole board. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for the explanation. I actually feel like you're presenting this as though it was brand new to us when we kind of got a preview of it at the last board meeting. And I think it's worthwhile to present again. At the point, let me see if I understood. You're presenting the new projections for the mid-year, and the expenses are accurate, but there's some uncertainty, and so that's when you said you wanted to increase the expenses by 5 million without actually increasing it on the line. And that's a little bit of the confusion I got, because when you got that question and you didn't turn it immediately into, well, let's create a reserve for that, because that's how it struck me. And when you got that question, I would have, if I were you, I'd have gone straight to your next slide, which showed the thing that we had already saw, to say, here's the overall picture of our reserves. And so the $5 million fits in there that way. That's how I would try to keep that from getting so confusing. Did I get that right? You're not actually increasing expenses by 5 million, but you want to account so that it's not a surprise if they do go up by 5 million. Is that close?
So let me try again. So when the board approves, and we had a discussion with our general counsel, when a board approves 235 million, when let's say we adopt the mid-year budget or the adjusted budget for the year, the board is technically authorizing staff to stay within the 235 million. But because power prices can fluctuate, for example, look at what happened last summer, right? And look at what happened in Texas. We could easily go up, we could easily go down from that level. When we say 235, that's based on our current projections of market and a forecast load. But these variables can go up and down. So the reality could be different. And if we were in a heat wave, and let's say the budget expense was going to go up from 235 to 240, we would need to do an emergency board authorization to exceed that amount. So we're saying, give us that authority in case it's needed. In case it's needed to react to market conditions, such as what Texas experienced, such as what we experienced in the last summer. If load goes up and our expenses goes up, so that we are not violating the board authorized amount. We're not exceeding that amount.
Okay.
So that's, but we didn't want to add it to the 235 million and show, instead of -6 million, -11 million, because that's not the expected value. That's not what we're expecting the year ending value to be.
So George, may I chime in here? Because I think I was in the same place you were, that we're actually identifying another 5 million reserve. And from what Amrit just said, I don't think that's the case. They're actually asking us to increase the budget authority line in case they need it.
It sounds more like a resolution, something like
Yeah.
that. rather
And
than-
I'm understanding why. So that's one is that was not clear until your most recent explanation to George. But is there any way that you could just say the reserves would be that 5 million, that or do we actually have to raise the budget amount?
You're raising the budget amount. You're effectively giving authority for staff to spend up to 240 million.
Okay.
And our expected expenditure is 235. But we're
Okay.
giving authority without having the
Yeah.
need to come back to the board.
So I don't, forgive me, but I think we need to work on the storyline and the graphic a little bit better, because that didn't connect with several of us.
And I know we're getting really late, so I just have two more important points. One of them is your slide on the new titles for people. I think you could cover that a lot faster. Once I saw that you weren't changing the budget, I didn't need specifically that level of detail. And secondly, Director Elahi, that shirt you're wearing has been distracting me all meeting. I have the same shirt because I went to the same race. So someday we'll have to have a who wore it best kind of contest, maybe.
That's bad. That's very bad.
Yeah, look forward to that. I just can't wait.
So I do have some other comments on the PowerPoint. Just quickly, oops, try and go through here. I actually think slide number 2 is confusing because I think you're telling two stories in the same box. I understand why, and it's very appropriate because one of the questions was asked about this. But if you look at the original budget assumed with your bullet points and then the mid-year bullet, you're trying to set up a comparison of what was assumed in the original budget versus what the mid-year budget is saying. In terms of your vertical graph to the left, it is the mid-year budget that's generating the $12.7 million decrease. And what you're doing is the original budget assumption is there, I'm going to say for reference, but I'm not sure it belongs in the chart the way you have it. I mean, it almost, and it's not quite correct to say this, but it belongs more as a footnote or as a box off to the side for that one area. That's, so you can do what everybody wants. Well, what did you assume? But the delta is the 12.7 million is because of the mid-year budget point. If I followed those 1, 2, 3, 4 bullet points, is actually what caused the 12.7, right? Am I right on that?
Correct. The delta is what we are assuming now from the mid-year budget relative to what was assumed.
Right. So it's too confusing I know why you're doing it, but it doesn't tell the story. I would encourage you to take another look at this slide and put that original budget assumption as a footnote or something.
Okay.
It doesn't quite tell the story I think you want it to tell. At least that's my perspective on it. And you'll learn I make lots of comments about graphics. I'm very
all appreciated. Thank you.
So we're all looking to have a successful presentation to the board. I think that this is all to the good. And now I understand, I do think you do need to clarify what the budget variance slide really needs to be somehow clarified such that it's clear that it says staff is requesting approval of, and it says here in contingency funding. I don't think that's the right phrasing. You really are increasing the annual budget cap So when you put it contingency funding, that's when we start thinking, what do you call it, reserves. It's just, you want to increase authority of the cap so that if spikes happen beyond the normal assumptions of the risk management committee, that you've got that cushion to work within rather than coming back to the board. I think so. The story to me is you need a cushion in the ceiling of the budget, because even though we've had very good results with the risk management approach, given the dynamics, you're just saying we'd like authorization to increase that. It's almost like a hedge on the budget cap.
Correct.
So I think that would be much more helpful, at least from me, my perspective, much more helpful to what you're actually trying to achieve with that slide. Anybody else? I always have lots to say, but since I'm sure, I'm going to cut myself off.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up a little bit.
Yes, please, Javed.
Yeah, this budget year runs through September 30th, I believe. So
Correct.
What might be helpful is to say, okay, as of February 28th, or wherever you guys can cut it off, where we actually are compared to where we were supposed to be part of the budget. Because the PCI number is really changed in January. So I would think we probably have money in hand rather than a shortfall through January or February, because the PCI rates are lower in October, and then they jumped up in January. So that might be helpful to compare those to see where we are. And then you're projecting, so if you're, and I guess I'm assuming that if you're really ahead of we've had more revenue than we expected through January, then the shortfall really is from February or on, or when the rates went up through December. And that shortfall isn't just the 12 million or the 14 million that we're off. It's much higher than that. So it'll be good to look at it. And again, on the 5 million reserve, I think it really is a reserve, because you're talking about unexpected natural heat or something else. I don't know if you still have a black box of a PCIA rate going forward from now to September. Is there still something going on there that you guys don't know and you want to budget for that? Or is it just natural calamities that you want to budget for?
It's weather and power prices. So though we are hedged, there is possibilities of extreme weather.
Yeah, I got that part. That's a natural calamity. We can't do much about that. But is that going to affect our? I thought we already have PPA and agreements and everything else in place. And PCI was a big black box. Is that still a black box from here to September?
No, not the PCI. PCI is fixed through the end of September.
So
but our load could change. That's not predict. We have a prediction of our load, but the load could fluctuate quite a bit. So if the load fluctuates quite a bit on either direction, and our PPAs are for fixed price, fixed volume.
Yeah, but is there a reason to expect a fluctuation in the load other than natural calamities?
I don't see weather as a natural calamity. It's just part and parcel of how we have to manage our risk.
Okay.
So yes, we should, especially coming in summer. So Java, just this, what happened in Texas raised prices for us in Southern California by 20x. So what was at, $40 or so was trading at $900 for a couple of days. So when you think about just the power sector as a whole, this $5 million set aside is next to nothing, given the possible volatility we have. Now, the thing is, we have money that's authorized, right? You've authorized 234 million already. So we have that money. So if we have a big fluctuation in prices right now, we have the authorization to pay for it, and we'll track how much our expenses are versus the budget authority. So this may come into play just in the last couple of months. It's August and September, when we've used up most of our expense authority that you've given us. And if you have a month or two of like just 3-4 days of extreme prices, will be enough to get us beyond the $234 million that has been budgeted.
Yeah, so the numbers are not that critical.
Yeah.
I mean, they obviously are, and I really appreciate what you guys are trying to do, because it's not easy. But as a board perspective, when we are given some numbers, we expect that those will be closely followed the following year. And if you're off by 14 million on a 250, that's almost a 20-30% difference.
Yeah.
Those surprises are what kind of make board members figure out what the heck is going on. So hopefully you can, and I understand your black boxes, but if you can come up with numbers that you can live with and we can live with, it's a little bit easier, because they're just numbers. Eventually it is what it is, but projections should be closer to what we expect. And we're off by 14 million. Yeah, PCI has gone up and down, and then there is weather is going to go up. But you do the best on those projections, then just give us numbers and say, okay, next year you guys are going to get hit with 30 million. And we have to live with it. We'll live with it. But the surprises are what is what we have to think about. Thank you, Girish. I know your job is not easy.
Yeah.
You're doing a great job. So hang in there.
I'm going to ask Chair, if I may make just one or two comments on this, because I think it's quite important. I think this may be a bigger discussion also, Javed, that we can take offline also, but really this is a very different business. This is a commodity product, and the volatility of this product, this is the most volatile product on earth. It is by orders of magnitude more volatile than crude oil, right? So if you think about going to the pump and getting $3 gas, and then a month from now, you're going in and getting $60 a gallon gas. That's the volatility you're talking about with electricity. And that's why our reserves are so high, and that's why our hedging is so high. So I get your point, but I think there's this business, being in the energy business, there's a certain expectation that we need to be able to communicate to you also as to what is that volatility when it comes to our budget. So I think there may be some ways in which we can manage it. For example, and we used to do this in the past when we had a giant margin, which is just add the contingency into the budget. There's an automatic contingency, so you don't get to see it. Whereas here, it's being actually a lot more transparent about exactly what the fluctuations in cost are. So I'm sorry to go on with that, but I really think it's a fundamental thing in our business, which is different than maybe the typical budgets that we see.
Yeah, I don't envy you guys. You guys are doing a great job. Keep it up, and we'll just try to focus on what we can. Thanks.
Thank you.
And I would agree with that last sentiment very much. Thank you. I'm sure you get the gist of this group. We're a friendly group, and we all are trying to build and help everybody get to an understanding, because this is brain power. We don't have to worry about getting Alzheimer's. So if there are no other questions, and I don't think there's anything else, do we need to take a vote that says an action item on this? The action item would be that executive board supports going to the board with a recommended adjustment of the $5 million cap, however we phrase that.
Yeah, we have a recommendation.
Oh, do you? Okay. I've got
pictures.
I
can see Andrea pulling it up. It's just a latency issue.
All right. Thank you for being so prompt, Andrea, and helping me know what to say. Okay. The request, if someone would like to make the motion, is approve the updated fiscal year 2021 operating budget. Expected draw on reserves of 6.025 million, and the additional 5 million in contingency funds to account for fluctuation in power supply expenses. Is there anyone wishing to make that motion?
So moved.
Okay, was that Director Tyson? Who said that?
That was Elahi.
Oh, Elahi, thank you. Elahi. And who's second?
Tyson will second.
Tyson will second, thank you. We have a motion and second. Do we have any further discussion? Did we do public discussion on this?
I don't think so. And I know that Bruce had his hand up. I don't know if he has a comment, but if we could open.
So I think we need to open public discussion on this for a moment. And if we have a public speaker.
Doesn't look like it.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. There is a motion and a second on the floor. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, thank you. Chair Gibbons,
Yes.
Vice Chair Tyson,
Yes.
Fliger,
Yes.
Elahi,
Yes.
Abekoga.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Okay, that was a long one, but very, very important one for all of us, particularly since we all have Texas on the brain and we don't have Stetson hats today. Andrea, if we were in the office, you'd be giving us Stetson hats. All right, thanks everyone. Take good care. Have a good weekend and stay safe.
Take
Thank you.
care.